All right. All right. All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee of the City Council. All councilors are present or will be very soon. This is a hybrid meeting where all participants will be in person or video or audio conference. Members of the public have the opportunity to address the committee if they signed up for the public comment per the rules published on the agenda and on our website on Friday. We will call for the speakers when we get to the individual agenda items you signed up for. So we're going to go first to agenda item A, O54. Councilor Jones? Would you like for me to move it for you? Okay. This is O54, adopting citywide text amendments to the Integrated Development Ordinance 1416 in conjunction with the 2022 IDO annual update process to address the need for more housing opportunities. I'll move a do pass. And we will now hear a presentation by Ms. Schultz, followed by just Ms. Schultz. And Ms. Schultz is ill, so she is going to be on Zoom. Are you there, Ms. Schultz? I heard her earlier. Ms. Schultz, are you able to hear us? All right. Should we go ahead to public comment and come back to Ms. Schultz afterwards? Is that okay with everybody up here? All right, let's go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll start with Joanna Stein, followed by Evelyn Feltner.
Guess it's a good thing I showed up on time. Anyway, well, I really appreciated all of your guys' comments at the last meeting about all the amendments. I think it seems like you're going in a great direction from the perspective of people who need housing in Albuquerque. So if you continue along that direction, you will have more young people who continue to stay in the city, more aged people who are able to stay with their families, and individuals that have affordable housing so that they have a greater percentage of their income to use on other aspects of their lives. Some of the other comments that were made that I think are not super meritorious are the ones that say you haven't spent a lot of time on this. You guys have spent a lot of time. I have written a letter to the editor in the paper. I have come to more than half a dozen meetings in support of this. There have been hundreds of people who've been asked and put their input into this process. So I hope that you can finally make a decision today and that we can have more accessibility to housing here in Albuquerque. And I appreciate all the hard work that many people here in this room, not in this room, and have done to make this process one that is very thoughtful. So I appreciate your work. Thank you, guys.
Evelyn Feltner, followed by Alan Lasek.
Evelyn Feltner, Secretary, District 7 Coalition, and speaking as such. We still think that a conditional use throughout the city for ADU construction is the best answer, but we do have a possible compromise workable solution. Permissive use for ADU construction on lots of 3/4 of an acre or larger. Conditional use for lots below that threshold. We also want to note that Councilor Grout last session demonstrated how useful it can be to have the ADU construction person inform the neighbors what is going to be built, and they might not oppose it, as in her case, she did not. That is what a conditional use hearing would do. Again, if you have to build a carport only after having a hearing for a variance, it seems logical that you should have to have a hearing and let your neighbor know what you're doing if you're building an ADU in the backyard. Thank you.
I don't see the lights on for folks to see when their time is up. Are we doing that tonight?
Our next speaker is Alan Lesek, followed by Miriam Hicks.
Hello, councilors. Alan Lesek here with the Apartment Association in New Mexico. I just wanted to come down tonight and really thank you all for working on this. I know that this is a very complicated process and change is hard. And, you know, I understand that there's never a silver bullet to anything housing related or development related. But, you know, we truly believe that you all have done a great job and we wanted to thank you for that. And, you know, I think that the important part about not only this bill, but the next bill is that you're providing opportunity. And opportunity is what Albuquerque needs. And so for that, we want to thank you and we wish you good luck on this. Thank you guys. Have a great evening.
Miriam Hicks, followed by Joshua Butler. Joshua Butler, followed by James Price.
Hi, Joshua Butler, President of the Valle Prado Neighborhood Association. I'm a bit surprised to see this kind of legislation going through zoning, land use. This is really complex legislation, and sure, it has a point here. But when we're talking about affordable housing, this is a very, very complex issue that goes way past zoning. And it needs to be lumped all together in one piece of legislation and one law. So looking at what I was able to see from where we're at right now, mostly what I see is kind of one interest pecking away at the interest of another group. I don't see a whole lot of coming together, a whole lot of collaboration, and a whole lot of addressing different things. So let me kind of address some different topics that maybe haven't been addressed before. One of the issues you're actually dealing with is that there aren't enough people that make enough money in Albuquerque to afford a house before the inflation that went on in 2022 and 2021, let alone now. And that's a serious issue, and that goes back to education, that goes back to opportunities in business. The city has done a pretty good job of chasing away a lot of business lately, and that's a serious issue that needs to be addressed. I know that COVID was hard, but it didn't help. Other issues as well. If you have so many people that are at the lower end and they're competing for housing, there won't ever be enough for all those people. And as much as it pains me to say it, you probably need to suspend the sanctuary status of the city for this time. If you can't address and take care of the people that are here with you right now and that are here in our city, there's no need bringing more people in. Of course we want to do it. Of course it's the charitable thing to do. But if we don't have the resources, we can't figure out how to do it. If we can suddenly come to this realization that, my goodness, there are this many people at this low end of the strata with regards to medium income, we need to rethink those kind of things so there's enough housing for those that are here first before we care for the people. Thank you very much.
James Price, followed by Aaron Hill. Aaron Hill, followed by Rhiannon Samuel.
Councilors, we are staring down the barrel of a demographic disaster right now, and it is because of housing alongside a variety of other issues. As of 2017, Bernalillo County became a stage 5 demographic transition city, or county. And what that means in simple terms is that the economic pressures of living in the city of Albuquerque have outweighed the birth rate, meaning that people are dying faster than they are being born because they cannot afford housing, because they cannot afford childcare, because they cannot afford enough food, so on and so forth. And so what we are looking at here is a situation in which people in 20 years, the population will not be large enough to sustain the current tax base simply because now people cannot afford to survive. What does that look like on a policy level? That looks like what Japan is going through right now. Japan as an entire nation is stage 5, and what that means is that many of their social programs are collapsing. Their infrastructure is unable to be paid for because their tax base is too old. Too many of their people are retired and too few are in the workforce. What does this mean as an individual? This means that I know that my partner and I will never be able to have a kid. This means that I know we will never be able to have a house. This means that retirement is a word that's kind of on the same level of unicorn in terms of realism. And so if you're looking at me and saying, why isn't this person buying a house? Why aren't they having kids? They should be a productive member of society. It's because I am in my 20s and cannot afford any of that. And maybe a casita would be a nice solution to that. Maybe a retrofitted apartment would be what I need to get on my feet. So maybe in my 40s I can buy a nice house. Thank you.
Rhiannon Samuel, followed by Donald Meters.
Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Rhiannon Samuel here representing the Commercial Real Estate Development Association for the state and speaking in opposition to the amendment that would not allow for duplexes in R1 zoning. Duplexes offer a variety of benefits, both for the residents and for the community as a whole. For an example, they allow for more efficient use of existing land and infrastructure while also reducing the environmental impact of new housing construction. They also provide more housing options for families of all sizes, including those with elderly relatives or with kids who need their own space. I understand that some people may be concerned about the potential impacts of duplexes on their property values or on their neighborhood character. However, I believe that these concerns are outweighed by the benefits that this change could bring into our community. In fact, studies have shown that neighborhoods with a mix of housing types and densities are often more stable and resilient than those that are dominated by single-family type housing. Please ease restrictive zoning to allow for us to be more nimble and innovative in our common goal of solving our housing crisis together. Thank you.
Donald Meters, followed by Leslie Padilla.
Yes, I'm Donald Metters, and I'm the product of growing up in a duplex. In fact, everything in our neighborhood was duplexes or fourplexes. Had the distinction of growing up in Los Alamos. Of course, it was a converted military base at that point, and so almost all the housing was duplexes and fourplexes until the big fires. Once the fires swept through, the housing stock was severely impacted. We probably lost half of the residential units because all the duplexes and fourplexes that were burnt down were replaced by mega mansions. And so the few duplexes that were left were severely impacted by being the lowest priced houses in the neighborhood. So it probably cut half the housing units in Los Alamos and quadrupled the price of the new housing. Now, most of us here couldn't afford to buy the houses we currently live in at today's prices. So the housing problem is not going to go away by just waving a wand, and I think that this is a good solution. And there again, I grew up in a duplex, and I haven't become an axe murderer.
Leslie Padilla, followed by Wanda Umber.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Leslie Padilla, I live in District 6. There's somehow a belief that greater density in R1 neighborhoods will increase affordability. So I wanted to share my experience of increased density in a former neighborhood of modest single-family homes. I moved back to Albuquerque shortly before the pandemic from Austin, Texas, which was experiencing a massive affordability crisis. One attempted solution, increased density through accessory dwelling units like what you're considering here. My Austin neighborhood was a prime target for ADU developers, and they set about buying and raising almost every affordable older home they could get their hands on. They bought out longtime residents. The impacts of this, during demolition and construction, we had to live with noise, dust, pollution practically every single day of the week. Did this result in more affordable homes in my neighborhood? Absolutely not. In fact, it resulted in many small, quickly built homes that were less affordable on a per square foot basis than larger homes, and many of those unfortunately got turned into short-term rentals. And it made the entire neighborhood less affordable as property taxes went up for everyone. So today I was wondering what the research was to support the proposition that increased density improves affordability, so I did some research. Interestingly, I found a recent Urban Institute study that looked at this exact question. It's just from March of this year. And I want to quote from the summary, quote, "We find no statistically significant evidence that additional lower cost units became available or became less expensive in the years following land use reforms." So I ask that you either reject this now or delay consideration until you and city staff have had more time to study this, including the recent Urban Institute study, and allow residents to understand the implications and develop a more targeted proposal. And I wanted to say something about equity. It seems highly inequitable that only certain special areas of the city would be exempt from this. I understand that people in those areas are concerned about maintaining the character of their neighborhoods, but shouldn't the character of our neighborhoods be important to all of us? I know it's important to me and my neighbors, so I ask you to either postpone or reject this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Wanda Umber from the Singing Arrow neighborhood, and I greatly appreciate your work trying to balance the needs of all the conflicting stakeholders here. I know affordable housing is important to all of us. I'm sure most of you have had the experience of going to the store and trying a one-size-fits-all garment. And if you're like me, when you left, you probably found out that one size really doesn't fit anyone. And I feel that way a little bit about this legislation. Let me tell you a little bit about our neighborhood in Singing Arrow. We have businesses, high-rise apartments, 4 and 10 plexes, duplexes, and single-family homes. These structures were designed according to the past zoning and building codes, where there was far less demand for electricity, water, sewer, and certainly parking. Over time, there have been remodels, construction of additional structures, including ADUs, some permitted, some not. We now have major parking issues in some areas of our neighborhood. We have streets that were not designed for off-street parking and odd sections in our neighborhood that have only one way in and one way out, and they're now lined by cars on both sides of the street. I weekly watch the sanitation trucks in their juggling act to try to get through and empty our trash without damaging anything, and they do a great job. We have had situations where emergency vehicles can't get to the houses they're trying to get to. We've had issues with electricity and sewer. Blanketly reducing parking requirements would not serve our neighborhood. We have had poor success in getting code enforcement to enforce the existing parking requirements, and safety has been a paramount concern in some of those cases. While we have 1 or 2 wider streets that could benefit from this legislation, it doesn't really help us. Please listen to the EPC and eliminate the changes in parking and entertain Councilor Grout's amendment to make ADUs conditional. Remember your experience with that one-size-fits-none clothing. Thank you so much.
Michelle Meters, followed by Sarah Walker. Sarah Walker, followed by Timothy Krebs.
I think, yes, Albuquerque needs infill. I just would like it done thoughtfully, carefully. I've been rethinking, I didn't realize that you voted down duplexes last week, but duplexes within a house that's there, fine. But what I saw in Denver were beautiful neighborhoods were 50% torn down, and the duplexes were mono architecture unattractive. It's like cutting down a rainforest and replacing it with pine trees. If there's very planning and control, like owner-occupied duplexes, limiting tear downs, I don't know if that's possible. Home home casitas only rented out by the homeowners that live there. Because potentially right now I have 8 households surrounding me, and potentially I could have 24 households surrounding me. And it's just kind of incomprehensible if we could just, I mean, maybe that's the future, but if we could just slow this down without destroying neighborhoods, without destroying their character. Parkland Hills had no murders last year. The murders surrounded us in all the multi-dwelling neighborhoods, and that's because we don't have absentee landlords, we don't have rentals. The rentals we do have are now short-term rentals. We lost those rentals, but anyway, I'm done. Thank you.
Timothy Krebs, followed by Renee Horvath.
Chair Feeblecorn and councilors, my name is Tim Krebs. I'm a professor of political science at the University of New Mexico. I've been helping the mayor's policy team with research related to Housing Forward ABQ. I want to urge the committee to adopt the zoning changes in the proposed ordinance. Research clearly shows that market conditions associated with rental prices and rental vacancies is the chief cause of homelessness. It also shows that housing is less likely to be produced in cities that favor single-family zoning to multifamily zoning. Increasing density will increase the supply of housing, which drives down rental prices. It will also produce economic, environmental, and public safety benefits. Research shows that more densely settled places are more economically vibrant, provide greater access to public goods and services, they reduce environmental impacts associated with sprawl development, reduce pressure on infrastructure and maintenance, and are better for crime control and prevention. Increasing housing densities will also make our city more attractive to younger, college-educated workers who have radically different locational, housing, and lifestyle preferences than their parents and previous generations of Americans. I support making zoning regulations in our community more flexible to further these positive benefits. Thank you.
Renee Horvath, followed by Miriam Hicks. Miriam Hicks, followed by James Price. We will now shift to Zoom and try to come back if people join the room. We'll start with Jane Beckley, followed by Dan Regan. Jane, you are muted.
Thank you. Madam Chair and councilors, the Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association has submitted multiple written comments. There are actual people behind those comments. We are the people who know our neighborhood well. We are the people who are hand delivering flyers to our upcoming membership engagement event to every one of the 1,033 homes in Santa Fe Village. We are the people who participated in Saturday's Albuquerque Spring Cleanup. We have a pretty considerable expertise about Santa Fe Village, and we are community members committed to supporting our neighborhood. We were not included or consulted in the planning of O2254, despite NARRO's indication that neighborhood associations actually are central, or should be, to planning for social change and community issues. Clearly, opportunities and choices in housing, increasing those, strengthens our city and neighborhoods. But not all strategies are equally appropriate or likely to be effective in all areas and all neighborhoods, and each deserves adequate vetting. The process to date of considering O2254 can best be characterized as, quote, a means of appeasing obligations to take input while seeming to pursue contrary objectives. We respectfully request that you defer and/or amend O2254 to ensure that going forward, there is genuine public outreach and engagement and ongoing accountability for its results and its impact, both across the board on neighborhoods and on the central need for additional housing. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Dan Regan, followed by Sarah Manning.
Do you know how to turn on my camera? I'm here.
We can hear you, sir.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, it doesn't matter with the camera then. Chairperson, and start my video. Can you restart my clock?
Go ahead, Mr. Regan.
I'm with KHNA and D4C. Lou Wallace, after trying to govern the territory of New Mexico, wrote that every calculation based on experience elsewhere fails in New Mexico. Some take that as a bad thing. I've always seen it as a society level form of the ancient adage, to know thyself. CABQ and the council is again trying a new thing based in part on calculations made elsewhere. If we consider the last decade of new things tried on experience elsewhere, you've got the ART project that was created in major part by a Chicago consulting firm. A very large majority of businesses and residents along Central were seriously against this project. From the $23 million in EV buses that never worked, the risky and confusing bus lanes that still cause accidents, not so good an idea or outcome. November 13th, 2017, in the wee hours of the night, council passes a brand new IDO written in large part by a consulting firm from Denver. 90% of residential owners giving input were against that. That evening, two property developers, one from the east side and one from the west side, both stated that we should let the markets decide what gets built where, by whom, and for what reason. The markets and the zoning processes since that night have removed the awareness of and inputs from close to 97% of all residential property owners. The city says it drew from experiences elsewhere in bringing up the housing forward process, and we heard the same, let the markets decide, twice at the last LUPS meeting. We're repeating mistakes again.
Sarah Manning, followed by Evelyn Rivera.
Thank you. I am Sarah Manning. I'm a resident of District 2 and a member of the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity. A family cannot be prosperous without a place in which to live. Our city, Albuquerque, is lacking 30,000 living spaces of all sizes and all price ranges at the moment. So there must be at least 30,000 people struggling in our city for survival, not only prosperity. This problem affects us daily. For those of us who wish to help, expanding the options for housing under O2254 makes sense. These options allow me and all other homeowners in R4 zones to decide how and whether I want to add additional housing on my property to make Albuquerque a better city. I don't have to do anything, of course. I can always not make any improvements whatsoever. But with this ordinance, I can choose to build a casita or expand to a second living space, and so can my neighbors. Nothing is being forced on us. We are simply receiving more options on how we use our property and what we are willing to do for the betterment of our city. Thank you, councilors.
Evelyn Rivera, followed by Alex Applegate. Evelyn, you are muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Can you start my time anew? Thank you. As a multi-generational New Mexican, I see the proposed IDO amendments as a form of modern colonialism, whereby those in power impose new values on our cultural values and way of life. At a neighborhood meeting, a city planner said that our neighborhoods needed to be diversified. We are multicultural cities and our neighborhoods are diverse. I know this because I've appraised over 4,000 homes in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. As a certified residential appraiser and a homeowner, I have major concerns about the accessory dwelling units section of the Housing Forward Plan. In the context of this plan, these will actually be rental units. The neighborhoods will drastically change in character. More cars will be parked on streets. From an appraiser's viewpoint, having a rental unit next to a single-family residence in a neighborhood of single-family residents would be considered a negative external value. Will the city compensate me as a homeowner for my loss in equity or value? The addition of a rental unit will not automatically add market value to the homeowner. An appraiser must prove that the structure has contributory value. If the value is not supported by comps in the market area, that structure will be deemed an over-improvement. Every single homeowner needs to receive a letter from the city notifying them of these proposed amendments. The amendment affects the value of a typical homeowner's greatest asset. The real beneficiaries of these proposed amendments are investors. This will further reduce the number of homes available for aspiring homeowners as single-family homes are converted to rental units. Thank you for your time.
Alex Applegate, followed by Terry Storch.
Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Alex Applegate from District 2, and I am chair of the Transportation and Housing Working Group of the Environmental Justice Caucus. We wholeheartedly support these changes. The transportation sector is the largest and fastest growing contributor to climate change, and the leading cause of this is our reliance on single-family housing and the need this creates for everyone to have an automobile. Albuquerque is dominated by single-family homes, which make up 68% of our community. In an average R1 zone, a person has to drive about 3 miles to get to a grocery store. More high-density housing, on the other hand, coupled with small businesses located within a neighborhood, make communities more walkable and bikeable, which reduces the need for everyone to get in a car and drive to fill their basic needs. High-density housing is also more fiscally sound. Imagine 40 people living in 1 block as opposed to 40 people occupying 10 blocks, which is going to cost less to maintain. Our city is unable to afford nice things because we are always having to maintain roads and services spread out over miles of space. For all these reasons and more, we support the changes as a start to making our community a more vibrant and healthy place. Thank you.
Terry Storch, followed by Patricia Wilson.
Thank you, City Council and committee members, and thank you for all the work you've done on this. Doing nothing is not an option given how much homelessness we have in Albuquerque and how low the housing stock is. I am concerned, like a couple of the speakers, that this isn't necessarily going to make housing more affordable. But when housing stock increases in kind of a capitalist market system like we have, the reasoning is pretty sound that prices will go down. So we have to have enough housing for the people who live here and who will be coming here to live. And so I do support the IDO changes in O2254. Thank you very much.
Patricia Wilson, followed by Julie Drakey.
Thank you. While I believe that O2254 should be deferred for at least 16 months, tonight my comments pertain to one failed amendment. At the April 12th LUPS hearing, A4, the ADU setbacks, failed. I missed the discussion regarding that amendment. There's no video available, and all I can tell from the minutes is the motion failed for lack of a second. I've asked LUPS members why they oppose this amendment, but have yet to hear anything. While the IDO allows accessory buildings to be located anywhere in the side or rear yard, the city's residential regulation FAQ sheet adds, quote, provided the accessory building is no closer than 10 feet to a house or other living quarters, unquote. All residential zones in the IDO, from the smallest R1 to the multifamily high density, still require a 5-foot interior side yard setback, with rural agricultural and corner lots requiring at least 10 feet. There's a good reason to have your house or your apartment building be at least 10 feet away from its neighbor. Fire is one, but another is privacy. While building on the property line may not result in a physical or regulatory taking, it presents what I consider an emotional taking. Living in a denser environment has challenges, and maintaining one's privacy is key. Staying 5 feet from the property line or 3 feet with no openings is not an onerous requirement in exchange for denser, more walkable and livable neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I'd like to respond to those comments. Ms. Wilson's an architect. I think she may recall that we had a zoning code prior to this IDO. That zoning code had the exact same provisions that this one has without that amendment. You can build on the property line as long as you comply with the fire code. And an accessory dwelling accessory building of any kind was always allowable on the property line, whether it be residential or not. So that's the discussion that you missed last time.
Right. And thank you for clarifying that, Councilor Benton. I am aware of that. And I then am still concerned about the conflict with the city's residential regulation FAQ page. If it says you need to be 10 feet away from your house, why don't you need to be 10 feet away from your neighbor's house? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and just again, that provision of 10 feet distance between an accessory structure and the main house was always in the previous zoning code as well. So this doesn't change any of that. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on. We've got a long list of folks to get to.
Julie Drykey, followed by Maureen Skorin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the council. I submitted written information in support of the amendment to make ADUs conditional use in R1 and R1A zoning. A couple of points to support conditional use approval. There are 4 areas in the city that are conditional use now, as identified in the IDO, and in R1 for ADUs without kitchens are conditional. I understand from public meetings, if Ordinance 2254 goes through as written, the 4 areas will continue to be conditional. A positive effect of conditional is that neighbors would have a facilitated meeting, if requested, arranged regarding the planned ADU. Having participated in facilitated meetings for conditional requests, I found them to be very useful and in most resulted in compromises that all parties could live with. The conditional use approval process is not burdensome. Notice goes to the neighborhood association if there is one, and neighbors within 100 feet, as I understand it. I have reviewed the last 6 months of the ZHE agenda and decisions. There were only 8 ADU conditional requests submitted, an average of 1.3 per month. I was able to find approval for all of those, other than the 2 most recent where the decisions are not yet posted. Ordinance 2254 has some good concepts to it and a major change to zoning affecting neighborhoods. The positive effect of conditional is the facilitated meeting, a positive reflection on our city to support communication and resolution of questions at the earliest point. Remove conditional with permissive you lose the opportunity for win-win and replace it with suits and court dates. Thank you all very much for your hard work.
Maureen Skorin, followed by Michael Brasher.
My family bought about 2 years ago. We moved from an apartment to a house that's about 50% bigger than the house. About a year and a half after we moved, the apartment we moved from cost more than the mortgage on the house. So we drastically need more housing, and I hope you'll support 2254. Thank you.
Michael Brasher, followed by Deborah Conger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I think we need additional time to study the Housing Forward initiative. I think much work still needs to be done. Questions need to be answered. The website statistic for the city of Albuquerque quotes the city as saying there are a total of 224,300 occupied housing units in the city of Albuquerque. It seems doubtful to me that all those community members, all those people living in those houses are fully aware of the planned housing initiative. And I think it's a missed opportunity because we hear from government. It also gives us an opportunity, if more people are aware of it, to hear from the general public as well. I will say that the council has done a good job in attempting to try and reach the public, but the meetings generally result in 75 to 100 people attending, sometimes without a PA system to hear. And I just don't think we've reached everybody we need to reach. Also, if you want a suggestion, one suggestion might be to create a pilot program to see if it works in some area, to find out the problems. I think that a pilot program might be a good way to start this off. And if we created a conditional program, it might be helpful to understand what are the problems and what are the needs of the community and what changes need to be made. Is it working? And if it's not working, do we get rid of the program? It's very difficult to get rid of these measures once they're instituted. So we ask for your consideration to hold off on this, and let's not rush into it. Thank you very much, sir.
Deborah Conger, followed by Richard Schaefer.
Hi, my name is Debbie Conger. I'm a resident of the Northeast Heights. Thank you, councilors, for letting me speak. Last LUPS meeting, Councilor Feeblecorn said that this process has been going on since November, and I do understand that. However, most homeowners do not read the legal notices in the journal. They do not go to the city website just to see what's new. And most are not members of the neighborhood association. So I would really like to see this deferred until some first-class mailing can be sent to all R1 property owners. I think this is really important and that everybody needs to be notified of it so that even if it does pass, they will know, they will have some ideas of what the rules are and what to look for. So I ask that you try to defer this until all R1 owners can be notified. Thank you.
Richard Schaefer, followed by Meredith Paxton.
Come on, Richard. Where are you, Richard?
Richard Schaefer, are you there?
Well, the guys we count on them to do a good job.
We'll try to come back to you. Meredith Paxton, followed by Roger McNew.
I don't ever do a good job on these things, Fred. I don't ever do a good job on these.
Meredith Paxton, followed by Roger McNew. Roger McNew, followed by Maurice Collins.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Madam Chair and councilors, my name is Roger McNew, longtime resident in North Valley, District 2. Along with my wife, Jane Yee, we support this amendment because we see the dire consequences of the city of Albuquerque's housing shortage every day. We all see the many people who are unhoused on our city streets. We see the many people who live in substandard housing. We see the many empty houses that are condemned and uninhabitable. Our local governments and elected officials need to do better in providing adequate, affordable housing. These conditions stem from deficient public policies. In other words, they are not individual problems. They are problems that we must solve as a community. Ordinance number 02254 will allow for higher density zoning in residential neighborhoods. It is one step in the right direction towards establishing public policies that will ensure adequate and affordable housing. I think it's important to point out that the Democratic Party of New Mexico State Platform and Resolutions Committee has already approved this resolution, and we expect that the Democratic Party State Central Committee will approve it shortly. Thank you for your time.
Richard Schaefer, followed by Meredith Paxton.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can
at
hear
this
you.
point. Thank you. So I do question what we want Albuquerque to become. I would argue that we're a middle class to lower middle class housing market right now, where our houses, according to Case-Shiller Index, are 29% cheaper, or Phoenix is 29% more expensive than we are. Austin is 51% more expensive. The entire national average, we're 14% below the national average. There could be a need for rezoning. It should be done smart. It should be done very transparently with a lot of upfront discussion. Last time we tried to deregulate housing across the board as a country. I know we're chasing HUD dollars, but those dollars are aimed at much bigger cities with much more expensive housing. Last time we tried to chase a goal of allowing very low income people into homes, the Bush administration pushed it from 2005 to 2007, resulted in a housing bubble, and a lot of Wall Street folks got rich, and the people who were pushed into those homes lost a lot of money, and the average American citizen lost over $42,000 per person in wealth. One size fits all isn't perfect for Albuquerque, and to deregulate zoning across the entire city, I think would be a mistake.
Meredith Paxton, followed by Maurice Collins.
Please incorporate the concept reflected by finding 33 of the January 19th EPC decision in the implementation of O2254. This would limit the concentration of the proposed R1 density increase to prevent the conversion of every property in a neighborhood to the maximum limit. It was added in response to a comment by one of the commissioners who observed that there are some neighborhoods where this just won't work. Spruce Park, my neighborhood, illustrates the destructive capability of limitless imposition of the ordinance. The area has many advantages, yet is fragile due to its location directly across the west boundary of the main UNM campus. This already brings strong incentive for landlords to densify every home. Unbridled imposition of O2254 would only increase this problem and would be unfair to Spruce Park because lots here are substandard in comparison with modern platting requirements. Our curbside lengths are generally only 50 feet and some are narrower. Although the increased parking demands brought by O2254 are referred to as off-street, it is ironically permissible for them to be met on the street. The sum of two 20-foot-long parking spaces, a 3-foot clear sight triangle, and the typical 13-foot wide driveways is greater than 50 feet. There would be no place for trash bins, mail delivery vehicles, tradesmen, or visitors. Fire trucks and other emergency service providers would be impeded. Spruce Park is incapable of bearing the burden of the O2254 upzoning. It should not be asked to do so because the existing mixture of multifamily dwellings with single-family homes here means that our aggregate density is already greater than that of some other neighborhoods that would remain nearly unchanged by the transformative zoning.
Maurice Collins.
Thank you for the time.
Maurice Collins, followed by Angela Merkert.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for affording me the opportunity to speak before you. I represent a team currently undertaking a large-scale ground hotel development project at 2026 Central Southwest that would be detrimentally affected by Ordinance 2254, introducing a lower height limit for the building on our site. On behalf of my firm, our team project members, and the residents who stand to benefit from the incremental tax revenue that our project would create, I certainly oppose both the intent and method of introduction of this legislation. Given the unreasonable timeline in which this amendment has been proposed, introduced to vote, and could be enacted, 2254 offers little recourse to accommodate design changes for projects already in pre-development and in design. It forces an unrealistic timeline to enter permitting after we had entered our project in through the proper DFT channels. The obligations created by this ordinance would effectively kill several underway developments, possibly including our, resulting in the forfeiture of sales tax revenue, hotel tax revenue, and property tax revenues of over $600,000 a year on average, or $12 million over the 20-year life of our hotel franchise. More generally, the amendment will negatively affect projects already in design per the existing IDO, specifically at Central Avenue, Main Street, and along premium transit corridors, which serve as the backbone for increased economic growth throughout the area. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Angela Merkert, followed by Ian Robertson.
Councilors, thank you for addressing this need and the potential for increasing the housing opportunities here in Albuquerque. I'm Angela Merkert, a steering committee member of Sustainable Equitable Economic Democracy New Mexico, or SEED New Mexico, and I'm also executive director of Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity. And I speak in favor of O2254. We need to expand the affordable housing supply in our city, and we need more equitable access to housing. Small business owners will stabilize staffing and their revenues as their housing is stabilized. Research identifies that stable, safe, affordable housing contributes to at least 50% of a family's ability to support children's learning outcomes in school, and also the parents' stability in keeping their jobs and sustaining their family support. Thank you.
Ian Robertson, followed by Tim Nisley.
My name is Ian Robertson, and I'm privileged enough to be a homeowner in North Campus, and I'm also the vice president of the Edo Neighborhood Association. This is a critical moment in our city's development where we as New Mexicans have to decide what our values are. I use the term critical because we are in fact in the midst of a housing crisis. And there are people at this very moment deciding whether they can stay in Albuquerque, whether they can pay rent, or whether they can keep a roof over their children's head. Decades of fearful and misguided sentiments have resulted in a crisis that centers around the simple fact that our city has chased unsustainable suburban sprawl and also spread misconceptions about both renters and apartments. And those misconceptions have slowed and prevented the creation of new, higher density housing for decades. I'd like to address some of the comments from neighbors who claim that the ULI studies indicated housing was not made more affordable by upzoning. As a former resident of Austin, I watched that city reject new units for decades, much like we're doing here in Albuquerque, until the situation became untenable there. Oftentimes, they use the same misguided opinions echoed by some of the speakers here tonight. And in fact, I would say that recent studies show that as of March 2023, rental rate increases have leveled off in Austin. How did that happen? By upzoning and building new units. So tonight, I'm asking City Council to approve the amendments and create a pathway forward for more ADUs and duplexes in R1 zoning. The city and the state need your boldness and they need your courage. And I do not think we need more time while people are wondering whether they can keep themselves in an apartment. Thank you to the City Council and to the city planning staff for putting this forward.
Tim Nisley, followed by Ann Lynn Hall. You are muted, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the work you're doing and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tim Nisley. I'm a former economic development, community development professional, also a board member at the Browse Community Coalition and on the city's Small Business Advisory Council. I'm here to speak in favor of O2254. The housing crisis is an enormous challenge for Albuquerque. These changes to the IDU that allow increased density, parking height restrictions, ADUs, and duplexes, or easing height restrictions, are the best solution I've seen to make more housing affordable and available. People have spoken eloquently about the benefits of these IDO changes and increased density on affordability, transportation, and availability of housing in Albuquerque. I agree. I was part of the community meetings around the original IDO, and they were inclusive. I believe this continues the vision of that IDO process. We simply can't continue to sprawl, and we need more houses. Thank you for considering the solution.
Ann Lynn Hall.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Council members. My name is Anlin Hall. I am the CEO of Prosperity Works. Our work is to advocate for systems that support economic prosperity, and I am here today to ask you to support increased housing options for our community. I'm also a resident of District 8. We have a housing crisis in Albuquerque. We are short 15,000 affordable housing units right now. It is also important to recognize the disproportionate impact on communities of color and low-income communities when we don't have safe and affordable housing available in our community. The changes proposed in the IDO that provide additional housing units are important changes, including allowing duplexes. Duplexes are a way to increase units without huge impacts to neighborhoods, and they are an easy way to increase our housing units overall. I urge your support and including duplexes in R1 zones to the IDO to increase housing access. I want to live in a community where we have safe and affordable housing for everyone. Thank you.
We will now backtrack to three people that may have entered the room a little late. We have Miriam Hicks, followed by James Price.
I'm Miriam Hicks. I'm the Director of Housing Development for the Greater Albuquerque Housing Partnership, and I'm an executive member of the Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition. I hear a lot of statements about that impact my work. There's too many affordable housing developments in one part of town. We need to limit construction to only parts of the city that have greater opportunity. We can't have pockets of poverty. All of these statements are made regularly, and Right now, single-family homes are excluding people in 68% of the city. That zoning was created as an exclusionary measure in the early 1900s. It hoards wealth into certain areas of the city, therefore concentrating poverty in others. You see those resulting concentrations of poverty in town. Kids aren't safe getting to school, the schools aren't performing well, and businesses are closing. In every way, they are barriers to access quality housing and economic opportunity. I believe there are only winners when we all have access to housing, to the housing options we need and can afford to support our families. When we each have access to economic opportunity and access to better schools for our kids, we see communities thrive. We all want to thrive and have our kids in good schools, in a safe neighborhood where they can build friendships, ride bikes, and go to the park. We need to make this change to R1 zoning. It affects everyone in the city, and it affects my family. My daughter will be a UNM Lobo next year, and I want her to taste that independence and take charge of her own life and not end up stuck back in her childhood bedroom. These changes matter to our workforce, our labor market, college enrollment, success of small businesses. Please approve the Housing Forward zone changes without further restrictions. Thank you.
James Price, followed by Renee Horvath. Renee Horvath.
Good evening. I'm Renee Horvath. I live on the west side of town, and I finally made it, so thank you. You know, I'm very concerned about the Housing Forward. It's not because I'm not concerned about the affordability, but I do think it's misleading. I'm not sure that these amendments will lead us to affordable housing. And I think it will affect the quality of life for our citizens in Albuquerque. I'm all about good design and to get a better product out of this and address those issues. So I do think that in the neighborhoods were not engaged initially. We just went straight to EPC. And then we went to those quadrant meetings and they said, we have to come to you to get these amendments. I know that Renee Grout tried to get some amendments to address some issues with the ADUs. And I put some ideas in my letter to make sure the lot's large enough to address setbacks and parking and not impact your neighbors. A lot of people are worried about that. As far as adding additional stories to apartments, we're building a lot of apartments on the west side. And they're taller than they used to be. And they're making people mad because they're shading their backyard. Why do we need to make them taller? Why don't you just require them to be 20% affordable automatically? I hear Santa Fe does that, so why don't we do that? And then you want to make them taller and more dense and less parking? We already reduced parking last year in the IDO annual update. So why should we reduce more parking? Even the planning department says you don't need to. You already reduced it last year. So, and we don't have the transit to transport people everywhere. So I'm thinking we're going to ruin the quality of life if we don't get this right. I think we need more time to get this right. I'm not sure that this is going to get the unhoused that are camping on the streets because they need more subsidized, they need more treatment facilities. And so I think we should hold off before we approve this. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that concludes comment on O2254.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelius. All right, we are going to go back to Ms. Schultz for the overview if she is online. There she is. Ms. Schultz, go ahead.
Madam Chair, committee members, thanks, and I'm sorry for that brief delay at the start of the meeting. I'm going to share my screen. So the first bill, the bill we're on right now, O54, proposes to adopt citywide text amendments to the IDO, specifically related to the Housing Forward initiative. As a reminder, there are 3 criteria within the Integrated Development Ordinance that must be met for any text amendment to the IDO to be approved. First, that text amendment has to be consistent with the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Comprehensive Plan and any other policies and plans adopted by the council. Second, the proposed amendment can't apply to a single lot or development project. And third, the proposed amendment has to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. So as the committee and the council continues to consider amendments tonight and in the future, these are the three criteria that must be met for any amendment. I went over the public process at the LUPS meeting 2 weeks ago, but I thought it would be helpful to just review again that prior to this LUPS meeting tonight, there have been 13 opportunities for members of the public to come learn about the proposal, provide public input on the proposal, and talk to either city staff or appointed boards or elected officials about this, dating back to October of 2022, when the planning department first did some kickoff meetings related to proposed amendments to the IDO and kind of talked to the public about what was maybe going to be on the table and took input. The EPC, the Environmental Planning Commission, had a study session on this matter on December 1st of 2022. There was not an opportunity to provide public comment on that meeting. An EPC study session really is for the EPC to understand the proposal at hand. But moving on from that, there were 2 more meetings in December related to hotel and motel conversions. That is one component of the Housing Forward bill this evening. And then on December 8th, the EPC had their first hearing on the matter. It was an all-day event and there were many public speakers. On January 10th, there was an online meeting about Housing Forward where again, the administration wanted to engage with the public, talk to them about the proposed changes and receive feedback. That led into the second and final EPC hearing on the matter on January 19th. The EPC, again, at this hearing, took public comment and ultimately did forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council. In March of 2023, city staff held 5 public meetings across the city that were very well attended, where we spent time with the community for a couple hours each and presented Housing Forward and took questions and comments and concerns. And then, of course, 2 weeks ago, this body had their first hearing, the first hearing of the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee on this matter, of which there were 45 public speakers who spoke to 054 then. That leads us to the April 26th meeting tonight. And then beyond that, the next step is that this will go to the full council at some point for review by the full body. And again, that will be another opportunity for folks to provide public comments. I'm not going to do an intense deep dive into the bill because I did a 40-slide overview of it 2 weeks ago. So I'm just going to kind of hit some of the high notes, which is in 054, there are 6 sections that all address kind of individual topics related to housing. The first one is related to allowing duplexes in the R1 zone district. The second one relates to allowing accessory dwelling units within the R1 zone district. Section 3 talks about multifamily conversions from non-residential developments. Section 4 relates to building height restrictions and eliminating those as it was originally proposed. Section 5 relates to exempting affordable housing development from off-street parking requirements. And Section 6 proposes a more general reduction of parking requirements for multifamily developments. Sections 2 through 6 of this bill were successfully amended 2 weeks ago. Section 1 was not amended at that time, but all other sections in some capacity were changed by this body. If folks are interested in seeing what those changes were, there are summary packets available on the planning department's website, which is www.abc-zone.com. You can also reach out to city staff through email if you'd like to receive a copy of that summary packet. Madam Chair, that's my very brief overview of 054, and I'm happy to dive into any proposed amendments that are on the table for tonight, unless the committee would like to have discussion instead.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Councilors, any questions for staff, or I guess the administration's here as well, if there's any questions before we move on to amendments? Councilor Grapp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Shanna, for that presentation again. I have a couple of questions for the administration, and specifically Mr. Griego.
Good evening, councilors.
Good evening. A couple of weeks ago, we learned, I had asked you if you had, who were the stakeholders involved when you guys were putting this Housing Forward initiative together. And I asked specifically if neighborhood associations were involved, and you didn't say yes, that they were definitively. So in that time, in the last 2 weeks, can you tell me if any neighborhood associations have come forward and asked, had shared any thoughts with you?
Madam Chair, Councilor Grout, thank you for the question. The first part of the question is how do we get to the proposal? And I think what we've heard from several experts tonight is we tried to figure out the best way to tackle some of these issues. And the way we typically start this, not unlike some of the legislation that some of you have sponsored, is we tried to figure out what was working and not working in other cities. So we looked at the research. We also talked to some smart people who were really had studied this, including some of our own staff who have frankly been looking at what other cities have tried to do with the specific challenges that we have. Cities that look like us, demographically, maybe the same size, economically. And we did our best to try to get a good cross-section of cities that we could learn from. So the first thing is we had to have a proposal to put together to have people react to, including industry folks, including neighborhoods, including advocates. So our team together, and it was a lot of folks in the administration who tried to say, okay, based on what we're hearing, and all of us hear lots from constituents, we get lots of letters and emails and so on, and we tried to figure out what are the issues that we're trying to address. The first step was really, what are we hearing, including from neighborhood folks, and what are some of the things that we can learn from? So then we put a proposal together, and yes, we absolutely got input from advocates. We had meetings with advocates, folks who do affordable housing, folks who work with the unhoused community. We definitely talked to people who actually are in the industry, who know like what it will take, for example, to build some of these affordable housing projects. What are some of the barriers to the current construction, for example? And when we pulled all that together, we had what was a proposal. And the next step was to start getting reactions to that proposal. So I think as Ms. Schultz mentioned, we tried to then start really getting input from not just neighborhood associations, but individual members of the community, everybody from the Urban Land Institute to folks who do housing affordability at the university, to try to say, okay, are we on the right? Are we addressing the main concerns here? So the second part of your question was, so when did we actually say to neighborhood associations, like, what do you think? So Shannon, as Ms. Schultz mentioned, we tried to encourage folks to participate in the EPC process. And I know our planning staff can speak to what they did before the EPC process, because in fact, and I know all of you received lots of correspondence from neighbors and from stakeholders to make suggestions about the process. But the first formal attempt was, for us, was at the EPC. And we were all part of that. And there were many, many neighborhood association folks who were part of that process. I know that they received lots of letters and lots of written comments, as you all have. So it's not just folks showing up, but it's people saying, like, make sure you take into account parking or whatever their concern was. So we had 2 of those, which we think were pretty well attended. The EPC accepted some of those recommendations from neighbors back in December and January. And then we did something we haven't done before with other zoning and other housing and other proposals, is in addition to the EPC process and the process we know that was going to be happening here in front of council, is we decided to go out and actually have some additional meetings. So we planned together with council staff 5 community meetings.
I'm going to stop you real quick. I do understand all of those meetings and all of that, but they were not involved. The neighborhood association leaders were not involved in the initial planning. Is that what I'm hearing? That's what it sounds like to me. I would like to know, what are the recommendations that you did take from the neighborhood leaders when they came to EPC? Could you please tell me what those are specifically, please?
So Madam Chair, Councilor, so I want to be clear from the very beginning. I think from the very beginning, everybody involved in this process, including myself and other folks who live, we're all neighborhood people. We all live in neighborhoods. So some of the problems we have, like we may not be neighborhood association presidents or coalition leaders, but many of us participate in our neighborhoods. But we try to listen to all of the concerns we're hearing from the community as a whole.
So, okay, I understand. I'm also a neighborhood.
Yeah, so it's not unlike.
But you didn't have any leaders, no neighborhood association leaders?
In the,
Coalition
in the
leaders?
drafting of the proposal, we did not
That's
include.
unfortunate.
I think it's the way, Madam Chair, Council, I think it's the way we all make policy. I'm not sure that on the catalytic converter legislation or on some of our MCI legislation or on lots of legislation we do that we go to neighborhood associations and say.
This is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It is a
When you're
big deal.
changing R1 to something else, I think it's a big deal, and I think you should consider it.
It is an important process, and that's why we continue to welcome Madam Chair and Councilor input from the community, including here tonight. We hope to have 2 more hearings and continue to hear feedback from them. And we're getting lots of feedback, and we're trying our best to incorporate some of those changes.
Thank you. That's it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griego. Any other questions? All right, and we're going to move on to amendments. I'm open to amendments. I'm told that we are not moving what was in the packet. So we can disregard what was in the packet. Anybody have any other amendments that they would like to move?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Grout.
Thank you. I do have an amendment that I'd like to offer. Could Ms. Schultz put it up on the screen?
Madam Chair, Councilor Grout, I would be happy to do that, and I would also be happy to explain it if you'd like, Councilor Grout.
I would like that very much.
Thank you. Madam Chair, committee members, this is an amendment that would create 2 new use-specific standards, one within the accessory dwelling unit use, and a second within the 2-family detached dwelling use, which are what we call duplexes, to specify that if you are developing on a property that has an accessory dwelling unit, then you cannot also have a duplex. And conversely, if you're developing on a property that has a duplex, you would not be permitted to have an accessory dwelling unit. You would only be able to have either an accessory dwelling unit or a duplex.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to move committee amendment number 1 to O2254.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments on this amendment? Councilor Grout.
Madam Chair, I'd like to get administration's thoughts on this amendment.
Mr. White?
Madam Chairman, Councilor Grout, this is the first that I've seen it. I did hear there may be something like this. The administration, I think, believes that the way the bill came from the EPC with regard to this matter is the appropriate way to approach it. But as we move forward, we've always said that we're willing to work with the council in terms of building a consensus in the community. But at this time, this is not something that we would actively support.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Councilor Grout?
Thank you. I did speak with administration, and they, at that time, they did say that they would support it. So it's very interesting that today we're not.
Mr. Griego, did you want to? Oh.
They would not oppose it. That's what he said. That's what I was told. And I offer this, Madam Chair, I offer this in compromise, in the spirit of compromise. It seems that we're doing everything and we're not listening to our neighbors and our neighborhood associations. And I think it's important that we try. And so that is why I'm offering this.
Madam Chairman, Councilor Grout, to clear up any confusion, it's my understanding that they said the administration would be willing to explore it. That's what I tried to reinforce there. With regard to actively supporting it, I cannot say that the administration actively supports it, but we continue to be able to work, and if this is a reasonable way to reach a compromise with regard to some of the issues, the administration is certainly committed to trying to find those areas of compromise that will bring the bill to conclusion.
Okay. I think at this time I want to withdraw it and we'll just bring it back another time.
Does we have a second? So we need the person on that seconded to agree to the withdrawal, right? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, all right, so we are going to withdraw it. Any other amendments? Any other discussion? We have a motion for 054 and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand and say aye. Yes. We're voting on the bill. No? Well, yeah, there is no amendment. The amendment was withdrawn. Withdrawn. So we have a motion and a second on 054 as amended. Those in favor, say yes. Yes. Those opposed? Passes on a 3-2 vote, and it will go to full council. Yes, Councilor Benton.
Madam Chair, I think there's, this would normally go to which meeting of the City Council?
This bill would go to, it would be read out on the 1st, and then it would be heard on the 15th, which will overlap with our budget. So, you know, we had discussed the possibility of immediate action so that we would not have one giant meeting for all of those topics and all of those folks to speak on. So we would get work done before midnight. But that is up to this committee.
Madam Chair, I mean, the meetings on the operating budget are going to be, by definition, lengthy, and this would not be to rush this, but rather to get discussions started at the council, because we will have more than one meeting on the IDO.
True.
With that, councilors, I would move for immediate action and ask for your support on that for that reason alone.
I would second that. I do agree that there's going to be a lot going on the 15th, and we will have a lot of folks who want to speak on IDO and a lot of folks that want to speak on budget issues. There will already be some overlap. There's no chance that this is going to go to City Council and be heard once and then be passed, but it would separate out the budget discussion and the IDO discussion at least a bit, so that we would have more focus on the topic of the day. So.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, Councilor Lewis.
Madam Chair, I think, even the administration just said that they expected several more hearings on this. And I don't think that we should bring it from this council to the next council meeting for immediate action. I mean, that's just not the pathway that, that most of these bills would follow. And especially something like this, which is such a massive sweeping change to our R1. And already, I think that the public thinks this is rushed, and so that would certainly send a wrong message. I think it's entirely inappropriate.
Councilor Benton.
I'll withdraw my motion.
All right. All right, so we have 054, 3 in favor, 2 opposed, going to full council. We're going to now move on to agenda item B, 07, I'm sorry? What was that? Oh, yeah. That's okay. All right, we're on to 077, Councilor Benton and Jones.
I'll move 2377.
All right, we have a presentation from Ms. Schultz. Ms. Schultz, you are still there, so I'll let you proceed, and then we will go to public comment after this.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Again, this presentation will be very brief as we dove very deeply into the details 2 weeks ago. 2277 is another set of text amendments to the IDO, distinct from the last bill, and the last bill was narrowly focused on proposed changes to promote housing development. This set of amendments is more on a citywide scale and touches almost all sections of the IDO and is not topic-based in nature. I'll give the same spiel very quickly that I gave at the last bill, which is that for the council to approve a text amendment to the IDO, it has to meet all 3 of these criteria: consistency with the comprehensive plan and other adopted policies and plans of the council. It can't apply to only one lot or development project, and it has to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. I'll talk a little bit about the public process associated with this bill. It was not quite as lengthy as the housing forward changes in 054. In October of 2022, the planning department held public meetings to invite members of the public and other stakeholders to say, here's what we're considering putting forth as changes in this year's IDEO annual update. What ideas do you have? And what do you think of our ideas? That packet of ideas was finalized and submitted to the EPC. The EPC had one study session on that matter on December 1st of 2022. Again, there was no public comment taken at that study session. Study sessions are not intended to take public comment. They are for the benefit of the EPC commissioners solely. The EPC had their first hearing on the matter on December 8th, and then a second hearing on the matter on December 19th. They took public comment at both of those hearings. The Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee heard 077 for the first time 2 weeks ago, and this is the second Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee hearing on the matter. Very similar to my last public process slide, this bill will next go to the City Council if it is the will of this committee to move it out of committee tonight. 077 itself contains about 50 changes that are in kind of a spreadsheet format that came from requests by neighbors, developers, city staff who have to implement the IDO on a day-to-day basis, members of the City Council, and members of the administration. Again, none of these changes are topic specific in nature. They're very broad, it's a very broad base of changes. And along with 077, there is what's called an Exhibit A, which is a full version of the IDO, all 600 something pages, where the EPC recommendations that made it out of that body up to the full City Council are depicted in red text. So there's an exhibit that's a full version of the document that you could flip through page by page to see what all the proposed changes are. That is my overview for 077, Madam Chair. I'm happy to dive into amendments unless you would like to move to committee discussion first.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. I'll just make sure if there's any questions from councilors on any of the issues in the bill. All right, we will move on to amendments. And there are 3 in your packet, but I do want to, we're not going to move A6, the major public open space one. So that is not being moved tonight. So we're going to move on to A7, which will be now amendment number 1 for this bill tonight. And this is in response to discussion that we had last time about, the demolition of older buildings. It's a complement to Councilor Jones's amendment that we passed 2 weeks ago. And I won't read it all, but I will move amendment number 1. And a second. Any questions or comments? We do have Ms. Morris online if anybody has any technical points on that. But again, this is really just, we did not want to have the demolition disallowance for relatively new buildings, but we did want to preserve those, buildings that are very old, pre-1945, so that we have a little bit more process for the demolition on those. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of A7, which is amendment number 1. Oh. Are we ready? Okay. Amendment number 1, raise your hand and say yes. Anybody opposed? All right, on a 3-2, that amendment passes, and we will move on to A8. Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move amendment number 2.
Second.
And this has to do with parking maximums. This is something we've had in the packet for a while, was discussed at EPC, and I'll ask Ms. Schultz to tell us where we are now. One thing, as we discussed this, we've been talking with folks in the community about this specific requirement, and my intention, I'm not going to move it right this second, but I'll have a description of the bill first, but then we want to make one change to the numbers here from 150% to 75%, which is something that's been discussed at length.
Madam Chair, Councilor Benson, I would be happy to explain this one. Mr. Cornelius, can you please stop sharing so I can share the proposed version of the amendment? Thank you. Madam Chair, councilors, this amendment proposes to amend the parking maximum language as the Environmental Planning Commission recommended it. The EPC had quite a bit of debate about parking maximums and what was the right number and what was the right fit. And what they decided on was 125% of the required off-street parking spaces would be the maximum number of spaces that you could provide for development in urban centers, main street corridors, and premium transit areas. And for areas that have zero parking requirements, that kind of ceiling that would create the maximum would be 100%. What got put in your packets last week was an increase of those percentages to 150%. What Councilor Benton has referenced tonight is through discussions this week, there's a desire to increase that percentage again to 175%, which would take an on-the-fly amendment of the sponsor if so desired.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. And Madam Chair, I move an amendment to amendment number 2, which would change the percentage that's in red on the printout from 150 to 175%.
Second.
And this, granted, is a considerable spread from what the EPC recommended. At the same time, we're talking to folks in the development community who feel like 175 is something they could support, and we would at least have some limits on the construction of excessive areas of parking on any given development. So in facing reality, I'm going away from what the recommendation of EPC was, but I think this is something that'll be better than nothing. So,
All right, so we are voting on the amendment to the
yes,
amendment.
This would be
and this
my
is
amendment.
just the change from 150 to 175.
Correct.
All those in favor of the amendment to the amendment? Yes.
Yes.
So that's 5-0. We're back on the amendment with the 175 provision. Any further questions? All those in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Anybody opposed to the amendment? This is the amendment. Right, we're going to go to public comment as soon as we get all the amendments finished. So we're on the amendment A8 as amended. And we had a vote of 3, 4. Those were 4? Okay, unanimous vote. All right. So I just wanted to let that be done so that folks know what they're commenting on. Again, we did not move the open space amendment. We did change the parking requirements from 150 to 175. And so with that, let's go to public comment so that they can be commenting on the final version.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Dan Rich, followed by Evelyn Feltner.
I may have jumped in late in the game. I'm not completely familiar with the process, but in the last week, I've been in communication with some of you, and I have a better idea. This is something that maybe has to be pushed until August, which I understand, but I already signed up for my 3 minutes, so I figured I'd come here. This is also about housing, but it's about people whose houses have wheels, and there's a lot of people in our society who come to work in Albuquerque on contracts. There's travelers, there's digital nomads. And I think that the IDO has been responsive to that in that the density for like an RV camping kind of setup, it's gone from 15 to 25 per acre. And the allowable is now 1 acre instead of 5 acres. The only provision that, oh, and one other thing is about 1.5 years ago, there was a amendment which was sponsored by Councilor Gibson that allowed for an expanded presence of camping and RV kind of setups in non-residential neighborhoods, which is great. The only disconnect is the old code had a provision that allowed for a reduction in the mandatory 20-foot setback if there's certain circumstances, like a screening wall, that the setback can be reduced. And that got removed when the IDO was established. And I lobby and advocate that that provision gets put back, that's a hardship for developers, people who want to provide this service, have smaller infill lots, but they're limited, not able to develop the land in a way that is beneficial
Mr.
because of this
Rich.
20-foot setback.
Time
That's
is up.
all I want to say.
Sir, I think we've all, or many of us have responded to you. I just want to make sure that you get in touch with the right folks at the Planning Commission to get this into the process for next year. So again, I think we've sent you that information. Please make sure you follow up.
Yeah, I will.
Go ahead,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Cornelius.
Thanks for your time, and I'm glad I could.
Evelyn
present this.
Feltner, followed by Rhiannon Samuel.
Yes, the District 7 coalition members are not against the hotel conversion idea, but we think it's probably a temporary solution. We think a more direct solution on a permanent basis would be negotiating with property management companies, the largest being Greystar. If you ask them and subsidize them in some way for doing so, to put 30% of their apartments in affordable status, you would make a big dent in the affordable housing crisis. It doesn't help that there are constant building of houses, and I just passed one on Indian School on the way into the meeting. Those apartments will probably be market rate. So you will have more houses, but you will not have more affordable houses. Subsidies for rent are the way you're going to get that, either directly or through negotiation with the large property management company. And we had one other recommendation coming out of the executive committee meeting for District 7. If you have duplexes in a neighborhood, they should be no higher than 75% of the houses or other buildings in the neighborhood. What makes duplexes stand out as eyesores is if they are 2 stories in a 1-story neighborhood or 3 stories in a 2-story neighborhood. Keeping them to the same height as 75% of the other dwellings would make a big difference in their acceptability. Third, I've been asked by a Northeastern resident to make sure that you know the fire code distances are very important. He feels that insufficient attention has been given to the idea that if you are 5 feet from property line wall, that could make a big difference in fire suppression.
Thank you, Ms. Feltner.
Rhiannon Samuel, followed by Donald Meters.
Hello, members of the council. I was going to talk about the 2 amendments, but I want to just thank the council and council staff for working with us as we continue to crunch the numbers on what it meant to have both parking minimums and parking maximums and what that reality played out as. One thing I'd want to caution you to, or just flag, is as we were looking at the demos, we appreciate Councilor Feeblecorn for addressing the date or putting it at 1945. But I would encourage the council to balance this amendment with the need for the city to have something on file that shows that the building dates back to that point. I've heard some feedback from some of my members at NAOP that not all buildings have records that go all the way back, and they're having some challenges with like differences in plats. Not something for the IDO right now, but just letting you know as you're tweaking it, if there's something we can do and look into it. But overall, just thank you all for your hard work on this. We're continuing alongside you every step of this process and every point that we can chime in, and you all have been so receptive to our tweaks or concerns as we address our zoning changes. So thank you.
Donald Meters, followed by Leslie Padilla.
Yes, Madam Chair and Commissioners, I'm back again. Thank you for not hearing the major open space thing tonight, but I feel we must make our statement. The Open Space Advisory Board has submitted a letter to all you folks. The OSAB recommends that the IDO amendment not be discussed or considered for motion or approval at the Land Use and Zoning Committee on April 26th. OSAB was not consulted or notified in any way concerning the original strategies and drafting of the IDO amendment. The IDO amendment proposes major changes to the site planning process of MPOS, and not consulting with OSAB is a serious oversight and dismisses legislative processes and the public trust in favor of expediency. Asking OSAB to make amendments on such short notice is irresponsible and demonstrates a lack of understanding of the complexities surrounding the site planning process of the Open Space Program and how the OSAB staff, Environmental Planning Commission, EPC, and the general public are part of the site planning review process. Per O-1563, OSAB is to advise the EPC, the mayor, and the city council as an appropriate city open space program, which advice shall include basic policies on management of city-owned open space, evaluation of proposals to install extraordinary facilities on city-owned open space. In the MPOS facility plan, page 22, the OSAB makes recommendations regarding extraordinary facilities in the city's EPC. The OSAB also advises the EPC, mayor, and city council as to appropriate policies, management activities and programs, implementation of adopted MPOS plans, and proposed to sell, lease, or exchange of land bank lands and lands to be acquired with open space funds. Okay, well, anyway, I'll skip to the end here. There's no evidence the current site planning review process is
Thank
not
you,
working.
Mr. Metters. I'm sorry your time is up, but I did want to make sure you got that we did not move that amendment, so that is not in here.
Yes, I saw that. And
Thank
I hope
you.
you were aware that they had a press conference this morning, and
Yes.
there is no more plan for an educational facility in Elena Gallegos.
Thank you. We're going to have to move on, Mr.
Leslie
Cornelius.
Padilla, followed by Barbara Taylor.
Ms. Padilla isn't here anymore.
Barbara Taylor, followed by Renee Horvath.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm not going to repeat what Don Metters, our chair of the Open Space Advisory Board, just said. I would like to thank you very much for withdrawing this amendment. And I would like to say that I think you sparked a very lively conversation on the process by which we approve extraordinary facilities. There has been a tendency in the past for a packet to come to the Open Space Advisory Board at the point at which there is a site plan. And I think, speaking now for myself, as we think about this, site plan is too late. It's sort of coercive because so much effort and money has been spent. So as a board, we will be considering how to strengthen the process, and we will come back to you with recommendations on that. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the council always has the last word. So the intent of your amendment is alive in that anything approved by EPC can be appealed to the full council. Thank you very much.
Renee Horvath, followed by Carlos Benavides.
Just really quickly, in response to Ms. Taylor and the chairman, and apologies, sir, for not letting you continue to speak. My bad. Anyway, we appreciate your comments. We very much appreciate the Open Space Advisory Board and its role. This is a unique board. amongst the city, and that it has an extraordinary role in how changes to the open space system are made. And we appreciate that diligence that the board, including longer serving and some of the newer members I know are very engaged, and we appreciate that. So I'm looking forward to hearing the suggestions of the OSAB on how we can strengthen the open space ordinance with regard to this process, the review process. I think everyone here was very well intentioned, including our co-sponsor who is not on this committee, but I think this has generated a discussion that's valuable. So thank you for that.
Renee Horvath, followed by Carlos Benavides.
Good evening again. Just real quick, I'm still interested in those historic buildings. So 1945, well, there may be some really cool buildings out there that may not be as old, so we may want to say something that if they have some unique architectural features that represent the Southwest, like Adobe styles. I'm thinking of the Pool property was probably built in 1957. It unfortunately was demolished, but some of those old homesteads still have some unique characters. So if there's a little room to allow the landmark committee to evaluate something that they think, hey, maybe we should save this, allow some flexibility there. So just want to bring that up. So thank you.
Carlos Benavides, followed by Patricia Wilson on Zoom. Patricia Wilson, followed by Josh Rogers.
Madam Chair and councilors, since the IDO's adoption, an Intercoalition Council Committee has reviewed hundreds of proposed amendments in the IDO annual update process, and every year has asked for a better process. Last year, thanks to Councilor Davis's sponsorship, an amendment passed that added at least a numbering system for better reference and a source column that only identified gross categories such as staff, admin, council, or public. This year's update started with 49 changes. The Charlotte, North Carolina's Unified Development Ordinance has 4 text amendments this year. The stated purpose of our comprehensive plan revision was to, quote, consolidate many overlapping and conflicting regulations into a new user-friendly integrated development ordinance, unquote. If the IDO continues to need so many substantive changes addressed as text amendments, I can only assume the comp plan's goals haven't been all that successful. My favorite part is question 4 of the cover analysis, which asks, how much will it cost? And the answer is, quote, there is no cost to the city, unquote. I would argue that the cost is tremendous, including the unrealized value of hours of public review, the loss of trust in elected officials, and the marginalization of neighborhoods. I'm not opposed to O2377, merely continuing to be opposed to the process. Thank you very much.
Josh Rogers, followed by Rosemary Blanchard.
Good evening, councilors. I'm Josh Rogers with Titan Development. Thank you all for the tremendous efforts towards this year's IDO amendments and for supporting the package of amendments to support housing opportunities in Albuquerque. We're in full support of these amendments and creating housing opportunities throughout Albuquerque. Thank you all in particular for you all councilors that are sitting up here tonight for producing the change to the parking maximum amendment to 175%. We can support that. And at the end of the day, we're aligned with the concept of parking maximums is we don't want to provide any more parking than is absolutely needed to satisfy the demands of our tenants. Last year, Titan spearheaded the amendment to the parking minimums to get them changed from 1.5 spaces per unit down to a much lower ratio that was based on the unit type. We thank you for listening to the feedback and making this change work for multifamily developments in these critical areas for our city. Thank you so much.
Rosemary Blanchard.
Thank you very much, members of the committee and members of the council. I had actually asked to speak in regard to 02254, but this one I relate to as well. Basically, I am encouraging you to go with these changes to the IDO that will increase housing in the city. It will not only, I think there's been a lot of awfulizing about what will happen if we make any changes, but we have pretty serious problems because we have not made changes. Not only the problems of people who are unhoused, but the problems of younger generations who leave because they can't afford to find a place here while they are moving their careers up. And we're also stressing elderly people like me who would like to be able to share the area where my daughter's home is without having to be underfoot or they underfoot with me. So these are very necessary for every generation. They are very New Mexican, which we are an extended family culture. And they are at least doing what we can to deal with the fact that housing is becoming generationally unavailable in ways that are affecting who comes here, who stays here. So please, I encourage you to adopt both of these ordinances, these changes to the IDO. We will be a better city for it. We're not doing ourselves any favors by staying the way we are. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that concludes comment on 02377.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelius. All right, we are on 077 as amended. Any questions, comments? All right, we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of 077 as amended, say yes. Yes. All those opposed? On a 3-2, that motion carries. It will go to full council. There being no further business, this LUPS committee meeting is adjourned.